want to start by saying I'm not the kind of person who scares easily. I grew up in a house where the basement flooded every spring and the furnace made sounds like something breathing. And I learned early on that most things that go bump in the night have mundane explanations. Pipes, wind, old wood setting under the weight of years. I believed that completely, right up until 8 months ago, when I moved into the house on Velander Street and something started walking past it every night at exactly 3:03 in the morning. The neighborhood is the kind you describe as quiet if you're being generous and boring if you're being honest. A long residential street in a mid-sized town. The houses are all old and well kept, the kind of street where the same families have lived for 30 or 40 years. My neighbours on the left are a retired couple named the Halversons. On the right is a woman named Petra, who teaches elementary school and keeps her hedges trimmed to a precision that borders on obsession. The street is lined with oak trees, old enough that the roots have started pushing up through the sidewalk in places. At night, it is very dark and very still. I noticed the whistling about 3 weeks after I moved in. The first time I heard it, I assumed it was someone walking home late, maybe coming back from a bar or a night shift, whistling to fill the silence, the way people do when they feel alone in the dark. It was a strange tune, not a song I recognized, not something with a melody that repeated in a way you could follow. It wandered. It rose and fell with no pattern I could identify. But I was half asleep and I didn't think much of it. I rolled over and went back under the sheets. The second time it happened, I looked at my phone. 3:03 a.m. The same wandering tune. Clearer this time, because the night was very still and my bedroom window was cracked an inch. I laid in the dark and listened to it approach from the far end of the street, from the direction of the old Marine Park, which closes at sunset, and pass slowly in front of my house, and continue down toward the intersection, and then fade until there was nothing. I laid there for a long time afterward, not sure why I felt the way I did. Not afraid exactly, just wrong. The way you feel when something you can't name is slightly, specifically off. The third night I got up, I stood in the dark by my bedroom window, one hand on the curtain, and I listened to it coming. It was the same tune, exactly the same, with the same rises and falls in the same places. And here's the thing, I keep coming back to the thing that still makes my skin do what it does when I think about it. It was exactly 3:03, not 3:02, not 3:04. I had my phone in my other hand, and I watched the minute change, and the whistling was already there, already approaching, perfectly on time. I started to pull the curtain aside. My hand was on it. I was half a second from looking, and then my bedroom door opened. I spun around so fast I nearly fell. Standing in the doorway was Mrs. Halverson from next door. She was in her bathrobe, and her hair was down, and her face was white as paper. I don't know how she got into my house. I don't know why I hadn't heard her. She crossed the room in quick, silent steps, and grabbed my wrist and pulled my hand away from the curtain and held it there. And she said, very quietly, almost no voice at all, "Don't look at it. Don't ever look at it, no matter what." I was so stunned I couldn't speak. We stood there together in the dark, her cold hand around my wrist, while the whistling passed outside. And I will tell you, honestly, that standing there listening to it, knowing it was just beyond that curtain, was one of the most profoundly uncomfortable experiences of my life. It slowed down as it passed my window. Not much, maybe a beat, maybe two, but it slowed down, and the tune held the same notes, a second longer than it should have, and I became suddenly certain that whatever was out there knew I was standing on the other side of the glass. Then it moved on and faded, and the street was quiet. Mrs. Halverson let go of my wrist. She smoothed the front of her bathrobe with both hands, a gesture so ordinary. In that moment, it was almost scary. She told me to sit down. I sat on the edge of my bed. She sat in the chair by the desk and looked at me with an expression I didn't have a word for at the time. I've thought about it since. I think it was grief. not fresh grief, the kind that has been carried long enough to become just a shape in the person who carries it. She told me about the house. She told me about the family who had lived there before me, a couple named Arden, who had moved in 12 years ago. Nice people, good neighbours. They had a daughter, 9 years old, who had woken up one night and gone to her window. It was the autumn, Mrs. Halverson said. The leaves were all down. She said the little girl had heard the whistling and gone to look at what happened. After that was something she was not going to describe to me. She was not going to describe it because she had seen it and she had been trying for 12 years to unknow what she knew, and she hadn't managed it yet. I asked how she had stopped herself from looking over all these years. She said the first rule was simple. When you hear it, don't go near the windows. Keep your curtain closed from sundown. Stay in the middle of your room. She said she'd had her husband build a wooden bar for their bedroom window that held the curtain sealed from the inside. A bar you could set without going near the glass, that could be hooked from across the room. She said he would make one for me as well. I asked her how long this had been happening. She said she didn't know exactly. She'd lived on Vellender Street for 31 years. It had been happening the entire time she'd been there. She believed it had been happening long before that. She believed it had been happening on that street for as long as there had been a street. I asked her if she'd ever called the police. She looked at me for a long time before she answered. She said yes, once, early on, before the Arden girl, when she had still believed there was something that could be done. 2 officers had come. She had warned them not to look toward the window at 3 a.m. They hadn't listened. She said she did not know what became of them because she had been in the center of her kitchen with her hands over her ears and her eyes closed until it was over. She said there was nothing in the street afterward. There was never anything in the street afterward. She said she had not called the police again. I barely slept for the rest of that night. In the morning, in the flat, ordinary daylight, I went and looked at the sidewalk in front of my house. I don't know exactly what I expected to find. Nothing. The concrete was undisturbed. The oak roots pushed up their familiar ridges. A squirrel moved down the branches. Everything was entirely normal. I stayed on Vellender Street for 4 more months. 4 more months of waking up at 3:03 and lying in the dark, listening to the wandering tune of Perch and Pass while I kept my eyes deliberately away from the curtain windows. 4 months of the small rituals Mrs. Halverson had taught me. The bar across the curtains, the particular way of moving through the house at night, never toward the glass. I left in February. I told myself it was the commute. I told myself it was the size of the house. I still don't know how to explain why I came to truly need, to be somewhere else. It wasn't rational fear. It was something deeper than that. Something that had been settling into me over those months, the way cold settles into a house before the heat kicks on. A specific and growing certainty that the thing outside was learning my routine the way I had learned its schedule, that the slowing of its tune in front of my window was becoming longer each time. That it was patient in a way that had nothing to do with patience as a human quality, patient the way something that does not experience time is patient, and that eventually it would simply wait until I made a mistake. I've been in my new apartment for 6 months now. It's on the 4th floor of a building with no houses in walking distance. I sleep well mostly. I don't hear whistling, but I have been thinking a lot recently about Mrs. Halverson, about how she is still there, about how she has been there for 31 years, about the bar across her curtains that her husband built, and that she has been sitting every night, alone now, for longer than she should have to. I think about her sitting in the center of her room. I think about the specific posture of someone who has learned to live alongside something terrible by simply never looking directly at it. And I sometimes think about what it saw, about the Arden girl at her window, about what it is that can be seen when something like that looks back, about whether knowing, really knowing, with your eyes and not just your imagination, would it be worse than what I carry now, which is only the outline of the thing, the shape of the fear without the content of it, the sound of a tune I can still hear perfectly in my head, even after 6 months. Sometimes when the clock changes to 3:03, I catch myself holding my breath. listening for a whistle that never comes.